The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday night when Jake got the call. He was sitting in his small apartment, watching an old movie and eating leftover pizza when his phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but he knew who it was. This was how it always worked in his line of business. "There's a job," the voice said. "No greetings, no small talk. Just business." Jake had been doing this kind of work for 15 years now. He didn't like to think about what that made him, but the money was good, and he'd gotten used to the lifestyle. No family to worry about, no close friends to ask questions. Just him, his skills, and clients who paid well for problems to disappear. "What's the details?" Jake asked, already reaching for his notebook. Woman named Lisa, mid-30s, brown hair, about 5'6". She's been hiding out in the mountains about 2 hours north of the city. Stole a lot of money from her company and ran off. They want this handled quietly. Jake wrote down the information as the voice continued. The client was offering 3 times his usual rate, which made him pause. In his experience, when someone paid that much extra, it usually meant the job was either very dangerous or very urgent. "Why the premium?" he asked. "She's smart, really smart. Used to work with numbers for big companies. Knows how to hide, how to cover her tracks. The people she stole from think she might be planning something bigger. They want this done before she can cause more damage." The voice gave him an address, a cabin deep in the woods, far from any neighbors or main roads. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear, and perfect for Jake's kind of work. No witnesses, no complications. "She's got kids with her," the voice added, almost as an afterthought. 4 girls. The client wants them taken care of too. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. In all his years of work, he'd never been asked to hurt children. Adults who got themselves into trouble was one thing, but kids were different. Kids were innocent. "I don't do kids," he said firmly. "The client is offering an extra 50,000. The voice replied, "These aren't just any kids. They've seen too much, heard too much. They're part of the problem now." Jake stared out his window at the city lights below. $50,000 was more money than he'd made in the last 6 months combined. But still, there was a line he'd never crossed, and he wasn't sure he wanted to start now. "I need to think about it," he said. "You have 2 hours. After that, the job goes to someone else." "And Jake? The client specifically asked for you?" "They heard you're the best at making things look like accidents." The line went dead. Jake set his phone down and walked to his bathroom mirror. The man looking back at him was tired, older than his 42 years suggested. Gray hair at his temples, lines around his eyes from too many nights like this one. When had he become this person? He made himself a cup of coffee and sat back down. The money was tempting, but something about this job felt wrong. Maybe it was the kids, or maybe it was the fact that the client was willing to pay so much. In Jake's experience, when people threw around that kind of money, it usually meant they were desperate or hiding something big. An hour later, he called back. "I'll take it," he said. "But I want half the money up front. Already done." "Check your account." Jake opened his laptop and logged into his bank. The money was there, just like the voice had promised. $200,000, more than enough to disappear himself if this job went bad. He spent the next hour preparing. Black clothes, gloves, the tools of his trade. He'd learned long ago that preparation was everything in this business. The difference between going home and ending up in prison was often just a matter of planning ahead. The drive to the mountains took exactly 2 hours, just like the voice had said. Jake's GPS led him through winding roads that got narrower and darker as he climbed higher. The rain had stopped, but thick clouds covered the moon, making the forest around him look like black walls on either side of the road. He parked his car about a mile away from the cabin, hidden behind some trees where no one would see it. Then he walked the rest of the way, moving quietly through the woods like he'd been taught years ago in the military. Every step was careful, every breath controlled. The cabin came into view just after midnight. It was smaller than he'd expected, with warm light glowing in the windows. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and he could see shadows moving inside. It looked peaceful, almost cozy. Not like the hideout of a dangerous criminal. Jake crouched behind a large pine tree and watched the cabin for 30 minutes, studying the layout, looking for escape routes, counting how many people might be inside. This was always the most important part of any job, understanding what he was walking into before he made his move. Through one of the windows, he could see a woman sitting at a kitchen table. She matched the description he'd been given: brown hair, mid-30s, slim build. She was reading something, maybe a book or some papers. She looked calm, not like someone who was running from the law, but looks could be deceiving. Jake had learned that lesson many times over the years. Some of the most dangerous people he'd ever encountered had looked completely harmless at first glance. He checked his watch. It was time to move. Jake made his way closer to the cabin, staying in the shadows, avoiding the patches of light that spilled out from the windows. He could hear voices now, the woman talking to someone, though he couldn't make out the words. The voices sounded soft, gentle. Not what he'd expect from a criminal planning her next move. The front door was solid wood with a good lock, but Jake had dealt with worse. He had tools that could open almost any door without making noise. He'd practiced this hundreds of times until he could do it in complete darkness, but as he reached for his tools, something made him pause. Maybe it was the way the voices sounded from inside, warm and caring, like a family talking together. Maybe it was the fact that this whole job had felt wrong from the beginning. Jake took a deep breath and reminded himself why he was here. This woman had stolen money, lots of it. She was a criminal who had chosen this life, and now she had to face the consequences. The children were unfortunate, but they were part of the situation now. He picked the lock in less than 2 minutes and slowly pushed the door open. The hinges were well oiled and didn't make a sound. Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and began moving through the dark hallway toward the light and voices coming from the main room of the cabin. In a few seconds, this job would be over, and he'd be driving back down the mountain with $400,000 in his bank account. Enough money to retire somewhere warm and never think about any of this again. But Jake had no idea that everything he thought he knew about this job was wrong, and what he was about to find in that cabin would change not just this one night, but the rest of his life. Jake moved through the cabin like a shadow, his feet silent on the wooden floor. Years of training had taught him how to walk without making a sound, how to breathe without being heard. The voices were getting clearer now, a woman's voice, soft and gentle, mixed with what sounded like children whispering. He paused at the corner where the hallway met the main living area. This was always the moment of truth in his line of work. Once he stepped around that corner, there would be no going back. The job would be done, and he'd drive away like nothing had happened. But something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the way the voices sounded, not like criminals planning their next move, but like a family having a quiet conversation. Maybe it was the smell in the air, not the harsh scent of fear and desperation he usually found in these situations, but something warmer, like homemade soup and fresh bread. Jake took a deep breath and stepped around the corner. What he saw made him freeze in place. The woman from the description was there, but she wasn't sitting at a table planning her escape like he'd expected. She was lying on the floor, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Her brown hair was spread out around her head like a dark halo, and her clothes looked like she'd been wearing them for days. But that wasn't what stopped Jake in his tracks. Kneeling around the woman were 4 young girls. The oldest looked maybe 13 or 14, with the same brown hair as the woman on the floor. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They were all crying softly, their small hands touching the woman's arms and face. "Mom, please wake up," the oldest girl whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave us." "Is she going to be okay?" asked one of the middle girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Her face was streaked with tears, and she kept looking back and forth between her mother and her sisters. "I don't know," the oldest girl replied, trying to sound brave but failing. "I don't know what to do." The youngest girl, barely more than a baby, was curled up next to her mother's side. She wasn't saying anything, just making small sobbing sounds that cut through Jake like a knife. This wasn't what he'd been told to expect. This wasn't a dangerous criminal surrounded by accomplices. This was a sick woman and her terrified children. Jake stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. In 15 years of doing this kind of work, he'd never walked into a scene like this. He'd been prepared for a fight, for someone who would try to run or beg for their life. He hadn't been prepared for this. The oldest girl suddenly looked up and saw him standing there. Her eyes went wide with terror, and she quickly moved to put herself between Jake and her mother. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking but determined. "What do you want?" Jake realized he was still wearing his black clothes and gloves, still carrying the tools of his trade. To these children, he must look like exactly what he was, someone who had come here to hurt their family. Jake started to speak then. Stopped. What was he supposed to say? That he'd come here to kill their mother? That someone had paid him to make them all disappear? "Please don't hurt us," the oldest girl continued, tears running down her cheeks. "My mom is really sick. She needs a doctor. Can you please just call 911? Call 911? Such a simple request, but one that would ruin everything Jake had worked for. If paramedics came, there would be questions. Police would follow. His client would know the job had failed, and Jake would lose not just the money, but probably his life. But looking at these 4 scared children, Jake found he didn't care about any of that. "What's wrong with her?" he asked quietly, taking a step closer. The girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "She's been sick for months, really sick. She keeps getting weaker and weaker, and tonight she just collapsed. She won't wake up, and I don't know what to do." Jake knelt down beside the woman on the floor. Up close, he could see how thin she'd become, how her skin had a grayish color that spoke of serious illness. Her breathing was irregular, sometimes stopping for long seconds before starting again. This woman wasn't going to hurt anyone. She could barely stay conscious. "Has she been to a doctor?" Jake asked. The oldest girl shook her head. "She said we couldn't? She said it wasn't safe for us to go to hospitals or doctors?" I didn't understand why, but she was always so scared when I asked. Jake's mind was working fast now, putting pieces together. A woman hiding in the mountains with her children, afraid to seek medical help even when she was dying. Someone had told him this woman was a dangerous criminal, but everything he was seeing suggested something very different. "What's your mom's name?" he asked the girl. "Lisa," she replied without thinking, then looked scared that she'd said too much. Lisa. The same name his client had given him. But the woman lying unconscious on this cabin floor didn't match the story he'd been told. Criminals didn't usually bring their young children along when they went into hiding. And they definitely didn't refuse medical care when they were dying. "Has anyone else been looking for you?" Jake asked. "Any other men like me?" The girl's eyes got even wider. "You're looking for us too?" "Mom said people might come. She said if anyone found us, we should run to the back room and hide until they left." Too late for that now, Jake thought. But the girl's words confirmed what he was starting to suspect. This family was hiding from someone, and that someone had enough money to hire Jake to find them. One of the middle girls suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to take us away? Mom said bad men might come and try to take us away from her." "I'm not going to take you anywhere," Jake heard himself saying. The words came out before he'd really thought about them, but as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. The woman on the floor suddenly made a small sound and her eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were unfocused, but then they found Jake's face. Instead of the fear he expected to see, there was something else. Recognition, relief. "You came," she whispered, her voice so quiet Jake had to lean closer to hear her. "I was hoping one would come to help them." "Mom," the oldest girl cried, grabbing her mother's hand. "You're awake." The woman tried to smile at her daughter, but the effort seemed to drain what little energy she had left. Her eyes drifted back to Jake. "I know who you are," she said softly. "I know why you're here, but please, they're just children. They don't know anything. They don't deserve this." Jake stared down at this dying woman who somehow knew exactly who he was and why he'd come, yet was still only worried about her. Children. In all his years of work, no one had ever reacted like this. Most people begged for their own lives, made deals, tried to run. This woman was using her last breath to protect her kids, and in that moment Jake realized that everything he'd been told about this job was a lie. Jake stared at the woman lying on the floor, her words echoing in his mind. She knew who he was. She knew why he was there. But instead of fear, there was something else in her eyes, almost like she'd been waiting for this moment. "What do you mean you know who I am?" Jake asked quietly, glancing at the four girls who were watching every word. Lisa tried to push herself up on her elbows, but didn't have the strength. The oldest girl quickly moved to help her, placing a pillow behind her mother's back so she could sit up slightly. "Girls," Lisa said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "go to the back bedroom for a few minutes. Take your sister's coloring books. I need to talk to this man alone." "But Mom," the oldest girl protested, "what if he hurts you? What if you get sick again while we're gone?" "I'll be okay for a few minutes," Lisa replied, reaching up to touch her daughter's face. "I promise. But this is grown-up talk, and I need you to take care of your sisters right now. Can you do that for me?" The girl looked back and forth between her mother and Jake, clearly torn. But something in her mother's voice must have convinced her, because she slowly nodded. "Come on," she said to her sisters. "Let's go color for a little while." The three younger girls didn't want to leave, but their big sister managed to coax them toward the back of the cabin. Jake watched them go, noticed how the oldest one kept looking back over her shoulder, ready to run back if anything went wrong. They were alone. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. When she opened them again, they were clearer, more focused than they'd been since Jake arrived. "My name isn't really Lisa," she said. "Well, it is, but that's not the whole story. My real name is Lisa Chun, and until 8 months ago I worked as a senior accountant for Morrison Financial Group in the city." Jake had heard of Morrison Financial. It was one of the biggest investment companies in the state, handling millions of dollars for wealthy clients. "I was good at my job," Lisa continued, "really good. I could spot problems in financial records that other people missed. I could track money through complicated transactions and figure out where it was really going." She paused to catch her breath, and Jake could see how much effort it was taking for her to speak. "About a year ago, I started noticing some strange things in the company's books. Money coming in from sources that didn't make sense. Large cash deposits that didn't match any of our known clients. Transactions that were designed to hide where the money was really coming from." Jake was starting to understand. "You found something." "You weren't supposed to find exactly," Lisa nodded. "At first I thought it might be a mistake. Maybe someone was just doing the paperwork wrong. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized what was really happening." She reached over to a small table next to the couch and picked up a manila folder that had been lying there. Her hands were shaking as she handed it to Jake. "Morrison Financial wasn't just managing investments for wealthy clients," she said. "They were washing money for some very dangerous people. Drug dealers, organized crime, corrupt politicians. Millions and millions of dollars, all being cleaned through fake investment accounts." Jake opened the folder and saw copies of bank statements, transaction records, and handwritten notes. Even with his limited knowledge of finance, he could see that something wasn't right about these numbers. "I made copies of everything," Lisa explained. "I was going to take it to the FBI, to the state attorney general, to anyone who would listen. But before I could do anything, they found out I knew." "Who found out? My boss, Mr. Morrison himself? And the people he was working with?" "One day I came to work and found my computer had been wiped clean. All my files were gone. Then Morrison called me into his office." Lisa's voice got quieter and Jake had to lean closer to hear her. "He told me that I'd seen some things I shouldn't have seen. He said that smart people know when to forget what they've learned, and that very bad things happen to people who aren't smart enough to keep quiet." "But you didn't keep quiet." "I couldn't," Lisa said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I kept thinking about all that dirty money and where it came from, and how many people were getting hurt so that Morrison and his friends could get rich. I had 4 daughters to think about. What kind of world was I leaving them?" She pointed to the folder in Jake's hands. So I kept copying files, kept gathering evidence. I was planning to take everything to the authorities and let them handle it. But then Morrison found out. What happened? He didn't fire me. He didn't threaten me again. Instead, money started disappearing from client accounts, and somehow all the evidence pointed to me. Bank records showed transfers to accounts with my name on them. Security cameras showed me working late at night when the transactions happened. Except I wasn't really doing any of those things. Jake was beginning to see the whole picture now. They framed you. Perfectly, Lisa nodded. Within 2 weeks, I went from being a respected accountant to being the most wanted financial criminal in the state. The FBI was looking for me, the police were looking for me, even bounty hunters were looking for me. So you ran. What choice did I have? If I stayed and tried to fight the charges, I'd end up in prison for crimes I didn't commit. And my girls would end up in foster care or worse. Morrison made it very clear that if I didn't disappear quietly, my children would disappear too. Lisa started coughing, and Jake could see flecks of blood on her lips. Whatever was wrong with her was getting worse. I took my girls and we came here, she continued when the coughing stopped. This cabin belonged to my father. He left it to me when he died 5 years ago. It's remote enough that we could hide, at least for a while. But you got sick. Cancer, Lisa said simply. Started in my lungs, spread everywhere else. I've been fighting it for months, but I can't go to a hospital. Can't see a doctor. The moment I show up anywhere with my real name, they'll find us. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine anger, not at Lisa, but at the people who had done this to her. A woman trying to do the right thing, punished for her honesty, forced to die in hiding while her children watched. The man who hired me, Jake said slowly. He told me you'd stolen millions of dollars from your company. Morrison, Lisa replied. It has to be. He's been looking for me this whole time, not because he wants his money back, but because I'm the only person alive who can prove what he's really been doing. And now he's found you, Lisa nodded weakly. I've been expecting this. I knew that eventually someone like you would show up. Someone who wouldn't ask questions, who would just make the problem go away. She looked toward the back of the cabin, where her daughters were hiding. I just hoped I'd have more time. Time to get the evidence to the right people. Time to make sure my girls would be safe after I'm gone. Jake stared down at the folder in his hands, understanding now that he wasn't holding the plans of a criminal. He was holding the evidence that could bring down some very powerful, very dangerous people. And sitting in front of him wasn't a thief who deserved to die. She was a hero, who was already dying for trying to do the right thing. Jake sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring at the folder of evidence in his hands. His entire world had been turned upside down in the space of one conversation. Everything he thought he knew about this job, about Lisa, about himself, was wrong. Lisa watched him struggle with the truth, her breathing getting more labored by the minute. She could see the conflict playing out on his face. The battle between the man he'd been trained to be and the man he was discovering he could become. I know this is hard for you, she said softly. You came here to do a job, and now you're finding out that job was built on lies. 15 years, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. 15 years I've been doing this kind of work, and I never once stopped to ask if the person I was hunting might be innocent. You couldn't have known, Lisa replied. That's how people like Morrison operate. They make the lies so convincing that even good people believe them. Jake looked up at her. How do you know I'm a good person? For all you know, I could still complete this job. I could still hurt you and your children. Lisa smiled, and despite her pain, there was something peaceful in her expression. Because if you were truly a bad person, you would have done it already, the moment you saw me lying here, helpless. But instead, you're sitting here talking to me, trying to understand the truth. From the back of the cabin came the sound of the children's voices, soft and worried. They were trying to be quiet, but Jake could hear them whispering to each other, asking if their mother was okay, if the strange man was going to help them or hurt them. What happens to them when you're gone? Jake asked, Lisa's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, she admitted. My sister lives across the country, but she doesn't know about any of this. As far as she knows, I really did steal that money and run away. Morrison made sure the story reached my whole family. So your own sister believes you're a criminal? Morrison is very good at what he does, Lisa said bitterly. He destroyed my reputation so completely that even the people who love me started to doubt me. My sister, my friends, everyone I used to work with. They all think I'm guilty. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark forest. His phone was in his pocket, and he knew he could call his client right now. Tell them the job was done, collect his money and walk away. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do, but smart and safe weren't the same as right. If I don't complete this job, he said, still looking out the window, they'll send someone else. Someone who won't stop to ask questions or listen to your story. I know, Lisa replied. I've been expecting this for months. I just hoped I'd live long enough to get the evidence to someone who could use it. Jake turned back to face her. The evidence in this folder, would it really be enough to bring Morrison down? More than enough, Lisa said, coughing again. When she spoke, her voice was getting weaker. Bank records, transaction logs, recorded phone conversations. I spent months gathering everything. There are also contacts in there, investigative. Reporters, FBI agents who specialize in financial crimes. People who would know what to do with the information. But you never got the chance to contact them. Every time I tried to leave this cabin, to get to a phone or a computer where I could reach out safely, I got sicker. The cancer spread faster than I expected. And then I realized that if I left, if I was spotted anywhere, it would lead them right back to my girls. Jake walked back over and knelt beside Lisa. Up close, he could see how much the conversation had drained her. Her skin was gray and her breathing was becoming more irregular. How long do you have? He asked gently. Hours. Maybe less, she replied honestly. I can feel it. My body is shutting down. The sound of footsteps came from the back of the cabin, and the oldest girl appeared in the doorway. She looked scared but determined. Mom, you've been talking for a long time, she said. Are you okay? Do you need water or anything? I'm okay. Sweetheart, Lisa replied, though it was clear she was anything but okay. Come here for a minute. The girl approached cautiously, still eyeing Jake with suspicion. When she was close enough, Lisa reached out and took her hand. What's your name? Jake asked the girl. Amy, she replied, then looked like she regretted saying it. Amy, your mother is a very brave woman, Jake said. She's been trying to protect you and your sisters from some bad people. Do you understand that? Amy nodded slowly. She told us we had to hide because someone might try to hurt us, but I never understood why anyone would want to hurt us. We didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, Jake confirmed. Neither did your mother. She was trying to stop some bad people from doing bad things, and they got angry at her for it. Lisa squeezed her daughter's hand. Amy, I need you to listen very carefully. I'm very sick, and I might not be here much longer. But this man, Jake, is going to help make sure you and your sisters are safe. Amy's eyes filled with tears. No, Mom, you can't leave us. We need you. I know you do, Lisa said, her own tears falling freely now, and I wish I could stay with you forever. But sometimes life doesn't work out the way we want it to. Jake felt something breaking inside his chest as he watched this mother say goodbye to her child. In all his years of violence and darkness, he'd never seen anything as heartbreaking as this moment. Amy, he said gently, your mother has something very important that needs to get to the right people. Something that will make sure the bad people who hurt your family get punished. But she needs help getting it there. The girl looked back and forth between Jake and her mother. Are you going to help her? Jake looked at Lisa, who was watching him with hope and desperation in her eyes. He thought about the money in his bank account, about the client who was expecting him to complete this job, about the life he'd built over the past 15 years. Then he thought about 4 little girls who were about to lose their mother, about a woman who had sacrificed everything to do the right thing, about evidence that could stop dangerous criminals from hurting other innocent people, The choice, when he really thought about it, wasn't difficult at all. Yes, Jake said firmly. I'm going to help her. And I'm going to make sure you and your sisters are safe. Lisa closed her eyes and let out a long breath, as if she'd been holding it for months. Thank you, she whispered. But even as Jake made his promise, he knew that helping this family would mean destroying everything he'd built for himself. Morrison and his associates would never stop hunting him once they realized he'd betrayed them. Jake would have to disappear completely, start over somewhere new, live the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, still, as he looked at Amy's tear-streaked face and her mother's grateful smile, he knew he was making the right choice. For the first time in 15 years, he was going to be one of the good guys. The next few hours were the longest of Jake's life. Lisa's condition got worse as the night went on, but she fought to stay conscious, wanting to spend every possible moment with her daughters. The 4 girls took turns sitting beside their mother, holding her hand, telling her about their dreams and the things they wanted to do when they grew up. Jake watched from across the room, feeling like an intruder in this family's most private moment. But every time he tried to give them space, Lisa would catch his eye and shake her head. She wanted him there, as if his presence somehow made her feel safer about leaving her children behind. Around 3 in the morning, Lisa called Jake over to her side. The girls had finally fallen asleep, curled up together on the couch like a pile of puppies. Amy, the oldest, had tried to stay awake, but exhaustion had finally won. I need to tell you some things, Lisa whispered, her voice so weak that Jake had to put his ear close to her mouth to hear her. Important things about my girls. For the next hour, Lisa told Jake everything he needed to know. Amy was 13 and incredibly responsible, but she had nightmares sometimes and needed someone to talk to when she was scared. The second oldest, Katie, was 11 and loved to read. She'd rather have a book than any toy. The third girl, Sophie, was 8 and had been born with a heart condition that required regular checkups with a special doctor in Portland. The youngest, Mia, was only 6 and still sucked her thumb when she was nervous. Their Aunt Rebecca lives in Portland, Lisa continued. She's my younger sister. We haven't spoken since this whole mess started because she believes I really stole that money. But she's a good person, and she loves the girls. She just doesn't know the truth. Jake wrote down Rebecca's contact information along with the details. Lisa gave him about each child's needs, their favorite foods, their fears, their medications. It felt surreal, like he was taking notes for a babysitting job instead of planning how to save 4 orphan children. What about the evidence? Jake asked. Lisa pointed to a loose floorboard near the fireplace. Under there? I have copies of everything hidden in a waterproof box. Bank records, audio recordings, photographs, contact information for the reporters and FBI agents who can use it. And you're sure this will be enough to bring Morrison down? More than enough, Lisa said. With certainty. There's enough evidence there to put him and his associates away for life. But Jake, you have to be careful. These people have killed before to protect their secrets. Once you start this process, there's no going back. As dawn began to break through the cabin windows, Lisa's breathing became more labored. The girls stirred on the couch, sensing somehow that something was changing. Amy woke up first and immediately rushed to her mother's side. Mom, how are you feeling? I'm tired, sweetheart, Lisa replied honestly. Very tired. One by one, the other girls woke up and gathered around their mother. Jake stepped back to give them privacy, but he could hear every word as Lisa said her final goodbyes to each of her daughters. She told Amy to be brave and to always remember that being smart and kind were more important than being popular. She reminded Katie that books could take her anywhere in the world, even when she felt trapped. She made Sophie promise to never skip her heart medicine, no matter what. And she told little Mia that it was okay to be scared sometimes, but that her big sisters would always take care of her. I love you all so much, Lisa whispered as the girls cried softly around her. And I'm so proud of the amazing young women you're going to become. Remember that everything I did to protect you and to make the world a little bit safer for good people like you. Lisa passed away just as the sun fully rose, surrounded by her daughters and the man who had come to kill her but chosen to save her instead. Jake waited until the girls had said their final goodbyes, then gently led them to the kitchen while he made some difficult phone calls. The first call was to Rebecca in Portland. It took some convincing, but once Jake explained what had really happened and offered to bring proof, Rebecca agreed to meet them halfway. The second call was harder. Jake contacted his client and reported that the job was complete. Lisa and her children were no longer a threat. It felt wrong to lie, but it bought him time to get the girls to safety before Morrison realized what had really happened. Jake spent the morning helping the girls pack their most important belongings. They moved through the cabin like sleepwalkers, still in shock from losing their mother. Amy tried to be strong for her sisters, but Jake could see she was barely holding herself together. The drive to Portland took 6 hours. Jake had borrowed a different car, paid for with cash, leaving no trail for anyone to follow. The girls were quiet for most of the trip, holding hands in the back seat, processing their grief in their own ways. Rebecca was waiting at the coffee shop where they'd agreed to meet. She looked like an older version of Lisa, with the same brown hair and kind eyes. When she saw the girls, she started crying immediately. "I'm so sorry," she told them as she hugged each one. "I'm so sorry I believed those lies about your mother. I should have known she would never do anything bad." Jake gave Rebecca the folder of evidence and explained what needed to happen next. Within a week, investigative reporters from 3 major newspapers received anonymous packages containing copies of Morrison's financial records. The FBI got their own package, delivered to an agent who specialized in money laundering cases. The story broke 2 weeks later. Morrison Financial Group was raided by federal agents, and Morrison himself was arrested along with 6 associates. The evidence Lisa had gathered was so thorough and damning that most of them pleaded guilty rather than face trial, the news reports painted Lisa as a heroic whistleblower who had died protecting her children and fighting for justice. Her reputation was completely restored, and her story inspired new laws to protect people who report financial crimes, but Jake never saw any of those news reports. By the time the story broke, he had already disappeared. He'd given Rebecca all the money from his bank accounts, enough to ensure the girls would have everything they needed for college and beyond. Then he'd driven to a small town in another state, far from Morrison's reach, and started over with nothing but the clothes on his back. 6 months later, Jake was working construction in a quiet mountain town, going by a different name, living a simple life. He rented a small apartment, bought groceries at the local market, and tried to build something honest for the first time in decades. Sometimes he got Christmas cards with no return address, signed by 4 different handwritings. Inside were photos of 4 girls smiling with their aunt, updates about school and friends and normal childhood things. Amy was doing well in high school and wanted to study journalism. Katie had won a reading contest. Sophie's heart was getting stronger. Mia had finally stopped sucking her thumb. Jake kept those cards in a box under his bed, along with newspaper clippings about Morrison's conviction and the new whistleblower protection laws that had been passed in Lisa's honor. On hot days when he missed his old life or worried about money, he would look at those photos and remember that he had helped save 4 innocent lives. For the first time in his adult life, Jake could sleep peacefully at night knowing that he had chosen to be one of the good guys when it mattered most. And sometimes, when he was walking through town or working on a construction site, people would tell him he looked familiar, like someone they'd seen before. But Jake would just smile and say he had one of those faces, then get back to building something good with his hands instead of destroying it.